The printing of Gutenberg Bibles was completed about 1455. They were mainly printed on vellum. Conveniently, paper migrated from China to Europe, and Gutenberg also used high-quality paper. 48 copies still exist, of which 36 are on paper. Printing houses sprung up like mushrooms, with Venice the leading publishing city-state by 1500. Printing and rising literacy were a couple of the many factors contributing to the rise of Northern Europe. The Middle Ages was 1,000 years of progress, from gains in farming, expanding the use and improving water wheels, creating universities, shipbuilding until they were capable of ocean travel, metallurgical progress, including cannons, and major strides in science. Book printing made books cheaper, more consistent, and available to a wider audience. Literacy continued to go up. Estimates of the European literacy rate before Gutenberg ranged from below 10% to about 30%. Scholars developed methods to start modern science, moving beyond the wisdom of the ancient world and the Bible to conduct actual experiments and use the scientific method. The start date is Copernicus describing the Earth and planets moving around the sun. Francis Bacon formalized the scientific method, including empiricism based on skepticism and careful observations. Galileo was the father of observational astronomy by using a telescope, including identifying 4 of Jupiter's moons and Saturn's rings. He studied speed and velocity, gravity and free fall, and presented theories of pendulums and tides. Kepler used accurate observations of planetary motion to determine that planets moved around the sun in elliptical orbits. Newton published Principia in 1687, which developed the laws of motion and universal gravitation. He co-invented calculus with Leibniz and built the first reflecting telescope. Universities were an outgrowth of religious-focused literacy and rapidly expanded to secular studies, including science and professions. Many scientists would be university affiliated, like Isaac Newton. Ditto Enlightenment professors like Adam Smith. Universities meant like-minded scholars could work together on complex ideas and principles. Newspapers were an obvious extension of printing. First, there had to be interesting news and information to publish and a paying readership. Then advertising was discovered. The Weekly Gazette in Paris was considered the first newspaper, first published in 1631. It had the official recognition of Cardinal Richelieu, chief minister to Louis XIII, meaning continued great press for the king. Using wood pulp made paper cheaper, and continued press improvements increased efficiency. Add professional reporters, a solid readership, expanding advertising, and newspapers were an industry. Eventually, Ben Franklin showed up in Philadelphia. The Enlightenment was called the Age of Reason, that stressed the importance of science and secular understanding. Descartes' Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, of 1687 could be the start date for the Enlightenment. Philosopher Immanuel Kant asked the question, what is enlightenment, which included dare to know. Economists viewed Adam Smith as the most important philosopher of the period. The social contract required people in society to agree to establish moral and political rules of behavior. Thomas Hobbes noting that life was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, developed the social contract between citizens and rulers, claiming a strong government was necessary to avoid the state of nature with no moral relations. John Locke expanded on social contract theory, with public authority coming from natural rights and government limited to the consent of the governed. Locke noted that people are rational and follow natural law, born equal, with the right to life, liberty, and property. Voltaire was probably the most readable and entertaining, pushing for religious tolerance, freedom of speech, and separation of church and state. That got him jail time in the Bastille. His most famous work was Candide, satirizing the optimism of Professor Pangloss. Moralists focused on Kant's categorical imperatives as necessary ethical rules binding in all circumstances. Do not lie, help those in need, and so on. Rousseau was another believer in contract theory. He stated, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains," encouraging the French Revolution. Mary Wollstonecraft was a feminist philosopher noting that women should be treated as rational beings, not inferior to men. She died a few days after giving birth to Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. Spinoza believed that God did not create the world, but the world is part of God, a form of pantheism. A special shout out to Pascal and Fourmet for early development of probability and statistics based on gambling. Thanks to printing, ideas could be spread by books, journals, and pamphlets. Diderot published his encyclopedia in the mid-18th century. Scholastic, scientific, and philosophical societies and salons could be used to spread academic concepts. Multiple groups met in coffee houses, pushing liberty and religious tolerance plus scientific advances expanded philosophical ideas. Samuel Pepys' diary of the 1660s described these discussions. Printing and literacy meant an increased demand for cookbooks, both for professional chefs and a growing middle class. Older cookbooks came from the court culture of elites, perhaps memoirs of chief stewards. The first printed cookbook was on right pleasure and good health in 1474, a cookbook and manual for healthy living. In 1615 was the English housewife for the landed gentry. Plain cookery for the working class was a later bestseller. Cookbooks have been a growing subject ever since. From perhaps 10% before Gutenberg, the literacy rate for England was over 50% by the 1600s and even higher for the Dutch. European literacy jumped to 80% before 1900. Global literacy is now over 83%, but 99% for developed countries. Ship engineering and navigation meant ocean-going vessels capable of traveling to new and unknown continents. The miscalculations of Christopher Columbus meant he was the first, leading to the unfortunate Columbian Exchange. Next time on Food History and Mystery.